I can't remember if it was from when I purchased my MacBook Air or maybe it was my iPhone, but one of them included 3 months of Apple Arcade. I've ignored the prompt to activate it for the longest time because I simply don't have an interest or even time to play mobile games, especially on my Mac, which is where I prefer to play games. However, a game on the Mac App Store recently caught my eye. It's called the Pathless, I believe, and it was only playable via Apple Arcade. So I thought, why not? I'll activate the 3 months and I will try it out. But why stop there? I might as well try a handful of Apple Arcade games, see what sort of games are on there and how they perform on my MacBook Air with M2. So I went ahead and I selected several games from the Apple Arcade page on the Mac App Store that looked interesting and supposedly supported controller, but more on this later. I played all games on my M2 MacBook Air while on battery power. They were played back to back in the same day, and I turned on the Metal Performance HUD for each if it was supported. First up, we have Warped Kart Racers, which is essentially a Mario Kart-like mobile game featuring characters from Family Guy, American Dad, King of the Hill, and Solar Opposites, which I've never actually watched. It includes both racing and battle modes and can be played by yourself, against bots, or online. For these clips, I only played against the bots. It gets mostly a locked 60 FPS on the M2, but the resolution is only 1280 by 800 with no way to change it in the settings. In fact, the settings don't include any graphics options, only audio and language settings, which is a bit disappointing. But the game works great with my Xbox controller. Overall, I really enjoy it, and I'll probably end up keeping this one on my MacBook Air to play again. It's just unfortunate about the low resolution. Next up, we have Sonic Racing, another Mario Kart-like racing game. This game originally froze when I tried opening it with the Metal Performance HUD on, which you can see here. However, once I completed the tutorial, I reloaded the game with the Performance HUD on and it worked fine. So if you want to run this game with the Performance HUD on, complete the tutorial first without it, then close the game and reopen it with the HUD on. Sonic Racing gets a mostly locked 60 FPS on the M2 at a native resolution of 2560 by 1600, and it supports controllers, so that's all great. However, it uses close to 100% of the GPU while it is running, so it's possible that the frame rate might drop with an extended play session as the chip heats up. As for my impressions of the game, personally, I don't like it that much. It looks beautiful and it performs well, but the gameplay feels like something meant for mobile. I much prefer the Warped Kart Racers, even with the lower resolution. Next up, we have Marble Knights. This game crashed on me the first time I tried making a new save file, but it worked fine after I reloaded it. I'm not entirely sure what the story is because I wasn't really paying close attention, but I presume there is a bad guy trying to destroy the kingdom, and these knights on marbles have to save the day. Like Sonic Racing, Marble Knights gets a mostly locked 60 FPS on the M2 at a native resolution of 2560 by 1600, and it supports controllers, all of which is great. Unlike Sonic Racing, however, Marble Knights only uses about 60% of the GPU, so the performance should be pretty solid even during a long gaming session. As for my impressions of the game, I really enjoyed it. It's a top-down style or isometric, and I really enjoy those type of games. I also like the marble mechanic, and it looks beautiful and it performs well, so this is definitely one worth checking out. Next up, we have Shantae and the 7 Sirens. Unfortunately, even though the Mac App Store says this game supports controller, I couldn't get it working, and I found no settings for it, so I didn't even bother giving it a try. I've played it before, though, on console. It's a platformer and quite fun, but without the controller support, it's a huge pass for me. Next up is the Pathless. This is the Apple Arcade game I was looking most forward to playing, but unfortunately, my first impressions weren't great. When I first opened it, it opened with a resolution of 1280 by 832. I jumped into the settings and found that I could change the resolution and many other graphic settings, which was great. However, the resolution settings wouldn't stick. I kept saving, but it would never change. It gives a message to restart the settings to apply, which seemed really weird because other titles don't have the same requirement, but regardless, I gave it a try and still nothing. I even tried restarting my MacBook Air, which also did nothing. The game simply refused to play in anything but the 1280 by 832, well in full screen. And in windowed mode, the resolution was locked even lower. I tried changing the resolution with the Metal Performance HUD on and off and still nothing, so I just gave up and played at the lower resolution. With all graphics settings on high, I was getting between 30 and 60 FPS, which obviously isn't that great, and that was at a resolution of 1280 by 832. The actual artwork of the game is stunning, though, and the controller support is great. The story also seemed interesting, and the gameplay was fun, but I couldn't look past the lower resolution and the unpredictable frame rate. I was honestly a bit disappointed in this one, largely because I had really high expectations for it, seeing as this was the game I was most interested in playing. I'm not sure how something like Resident Evil Village can run at 1440 mid-high with a higher average frame rate than this Apple Arcade game, but anyways, moving on. Next up, we have Oceanhorn 2 Knights of the Lost Realm, which is a Zelda-like title. This is probably the most immersive and console-like game in Apple Arcade currently. In other words, it doesn't feel like a mobile or an arcade game, which I personally appreciate, especially because I'm playing these games on a MacBook Air, not an iPhone. I don't know why, but the Metal Performance HUD shrunk for this game. Maybe because it was playing at 2560 by 1664 instead of the 2560 by 1600 the other games are playing at, but anyways, there's no graphics settings to actually change that, only a high and low preset. With the preset on high, I'm getting between 40 and 60 FPS when the draw distance is quite far, but while in a cave or something, the FPS is close to a lock 60, and the controller support is excellent as well. Even though I don't like Zelda-style games, mainly because I don't like puzzles, but anyways, I'll still be keeping this title on my MacBook Air to play on and off, at least until my 3 months are up. Next up, we have HyperBrawl Tournament. This is another game that the Mac App Store says supports controllers, but I couldn't get it working, and there don't appear to be any settings for it. On the bright side, the game runs at 2560 by 1600 at a mostly locked 60 FPS, so that's good, but without controller support, I'm really not that interested. It's a bit disappointing because I really liked the look of this game. It reminds me a bit of Rocket League, but with people instead of cars, and with a more isometric view. But anyways. Next we have Asphalt 8, Airborne Plus, which is probably the best racing game on Apple Arcade currently. I still remember playing the first Asphalt game on iOS many years ago. I think it was number 5, and being very impressed by the caliber of game on a mobile device in 2010. Not much has changed really. The Asphalt series is still impressive for a mobile title, and it looks equally as great on my MacBook Air. I'm getting a locked 60 FPS at a native resolution of 2560 by 1600, and by a locked 60, I actually mean it. I don't think I saw the FPS stutter even once while I was playing. And the game only uses about 70% of the M2's GPU, so an extended gaming session should see consistent performance. If you have Apple Arcade, and especially if you like racing games, then this one is obviously a no-brainer. Next up is LEGO Brawls, a Super Smash-like platform fighting game featuring LEGO characters and environments. I think it can be played online or against bots, but for these clips, I just played against the bots. It plays at 2560 by 1600 and at a mostly locked 60 FPS on the M2, with only the occasional dip into the high 50s. It supports controllers, thankfully, and it works the GPU at around 80%, so should be consistent performance even during a long session. As for my impressions of the game, I think it's fine. but I'm not that interested in these style of games. It looks nice and it runs well, but that's really all I can say that's positive about it. If you like Smash-like games though, this is obviously one to check out. Castle Crumble is up next. I think this one is relatively new to the App Store. It is exactly what it sounds like. You crumble castles by hurling cannonballs or using dynamite or other things that they give you in the game. It runs at a native 2560 by 1600 with a mostly locked 60 FPS. There is a graphic preset option in the settings which can be changed to low, medium, or high. I kept it on high for these clips and still had a consistent frame rate. The game also supports controllers, which made me kind of laugh a bit. If any of the titles on this list didn't support controllers, this was the only one I would have been okay with because, I mean, it's a stationary point and shoot, perfect for mouse and trackpad. The fact that it supports controllers is just a bonus. But the reason it made me laugh was because there was other titles on this list that should have absolutely supported controllers, and yet they don't. And meanwhile, this one does, so go figure. Anyways, the game plays excellently and it's quite fun. Very mobile though, not really something that gets me excited to play a game on my MacBook Air, but sometimes this is all you're looking for when you need a break from work or something. Next up we have Gear.Club Stradale, which I believe that's the correct pronunciation. This is another racing game. Unlike Asphalt, however, Gear.Club is more realistic. It reminds me a bit of Forza Horizon on Xbox, actually, just on mobile. I couldn't get this game to load with the Metal Performance HUD on. I kept getting a permission denied message in the terminal, so we're just going to take a look at the game with the HUD off. The first time I tried playing it, it actually froze during the intro loading screen. This seems to be a bit of a trend. Luckily, though, closing the game and reopening it fixed the issue. I can't be sure, but it seems to be playing at 2560 by 1600 and at a reliable 60 FPS like most of the other games we have tried. The settings do include some graphic options such as a quality preset, a VSync option, and a frame cap, which I've set to 60 because that's as high as my display goes. It's too bad the performance HUD doesn't work because I'd like to see how these settings actually affect the frame rate while I'm playing the game, but anyways, overall, the game is fine. It looks nice, it plays well, aside from freezing during the intro. There also seems to be a lot of car options in the game, so if that's something you appreciate, collecting cars, then obviously this is one to check out. Again, it reminds me a lot of Forza, but on mobile, so if you're looking for a semi-realistic racer, then maybe this is one to check out. HEROish is up next, and I'm not really sure how to describe this one. Obviously, you're a knight. You can move left and right, but you can't control the character when the actual fighting starts. It's an auto fighter. You just move your character into range, and he takes care of the rest. However, you have these skills called spell cards that you can activate periodically, which give you power-ups or activate magic attacks, or summon troops to assist you in battle. You also gain experience and collect money, so presumably there's a level up system and a store to buy new spell cards, but I didn't really get that far to find out. The game runs at 2560 by 1600 at a mostly locked 60 FPS. It supports controller, which is great, and only uses about 70% of the GPU on M2. Honestly, these types of games are ones I tend to avoid. I don't like any sort of auto fighting system. I'd rather just play all aspects of the game myself, but this one actually isn't so bad. The game looks great and it's actually quite fun. There is an interesting story, and I like how when traveling between the towns or the chapters, you can go anywhere on the map. In fact, I find that sort of unique. During the actual gameplay, you can only go left or right, but on the map, you can go anywhere you want. Anyways, this is definitely one to check out. I recommend it as well. Horizon Chase 2 is up next. It is another racer, obviously, but this one is more of an arcade-style racer. Also, have you noticed how many racing games are on Apple Arcade? The game runs at 1280 by 832, which is a bit weird, but at a locked 60 FPS. There are no graphic options, so you're stuck with the resolution, unfortunately, but the game does support controllers, thankfully. Also, something strange happened while I was playing this one. I loaded the game via terminal so I could have the performance HUD on, and partway into the game, I was asked if Terminal could access my contacts. I found this really weird. Why would the game, via Terminal, prompt me to share my contacts? Seems a bit odd. But anyways, the game is fun and it runs well, but if I was looking for a racer personally, I'd probably reach for Asphalt first. And the low resolution doesn't help. All that being said, the game is receiving periodic updates and new content, which is nice to see. Maybe they will add a higher resolution at some point. Okay, getting close to the end now. Next up is Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis, which is essentially Mario Tennis, but with Nickelodeon characters like SpongeBob, Danny Phantom, Garfield, Hey Arnold, Ninja Turtles, and whatever else. The game runs at 2560 by 1600 with a frame rate between 50 and 60 on the M2. Only 60% of the M2 GPU is being used for this one, so presumably a locked 60 FPS is possible. It's kind of weird that it's not hitting that 60, but anyways, the game does support controllers, so that's great. The gameplay is also quite fun. Well, as fun as you'd expect for, a tennis game like this. As I've already said, it's essentially a mobile version of Mario Tennis. That means there's a lot more hand-holding and a lot less control over the character, but that doesn't really hinder the experience. If you like Mario Tennis-like games, then this is probably one to check out. Next up, we have SpongeBob Patty Pursuit, which is the second last Apple Arcade game we're going to take a look at. It is an auto runner, which means the character moves for you and you just decide when to jump, and in the case of this one, when to swing your arms around to push obstacles out of the way. The game runs at 2560 by 1600 at a mostly locked 60 FPS. The game also looks beautiful and is really sharp. I'm not sure why, maybe it's just the colorful, cartoony artwork, or maybe it's the type of game, but this game looks a lot better than the others have at the same resolution. It also supports controllers, of course, and only uses about 40% of the M2's GPU. Similar to HEROish, I'm not a fan of auto anything in a game, hence why I don't typically play auto runners, or auto fighters, or auto anything else. That being said, SpongeBob Patty Pursuit is quite fun, it looks great, it runs well, and is still getting periodic updates to add new content, so if you like the auto runner style of game, then this is obviously one to take a look at. And finally, we have the Last Campfire. This is a beautiful looking adventure puzzle game, and I was looking forward to trying this one. However, my excitement quickly evaporated when I realized that it doesn't actually support controllers. Go figure. The Mac App Store says it does, but it doesn't. Or at least it didn't for me. This seems to be a bit of a trend. The Mac App Store says it supports controllers, but it actually doesn't. It makes me wonder, is anyone actually vetting this stuff? Anyways, even though the game doesn't support controllers, I still played a few minutes of it, mostly just to watch the cute, and yet sad, introductory cutscene. The game runs at 2560 by 1600, but the frame rate is all over the place. However, once I got into the actual gameplay, it seemed to lock at 60. But, that lack of controller support is really frustrating with this one. I don't really have anything else to say about this one because I didn't really play it enough to offer you an opinion, but it looks amazing. That's really all I can say, but it desperately needs controller support. Then I'd be happy to give it another go, even though I don't really like puzzle games. Okay, so we're finally at the end. That was the last game. However, just before we finish this video, I want to give some quick impressions of Apple Arcade as a whole. Personally, it isn't for me. I don't particularly enjoy mobile games, and I don't have the time to invest in them. I'd rather have one AAA game that I really like instead of 100 mobile games that I really don't. In fact, that seems to be something I've learned as I've gotten older. I remember when I was much younger, I used to be excited about all these games that were coming out each year. But now I think, why does it matter? I don't have the time. I don't have the interest, and I don't have the money to get all these games anyways. Instead, I keep an eye on only a few big-name titles that are coming out. This year, for example, I was keeping an eye on Hogwarts Legacy, which has already launched, and Diablo 4, which has yet to launch. I think that's also why I've been enjoying games on my MacBook Air so much as opposed to my Xbox. I actually like having less options available to me. It's unfortunate, of course, that a lot of games are not supported on Mac, but the few that are, I've been really enjoying. I don't feel rushed to complete them because another 30 games are coming down the pipeline soon. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting too old for games. Anyways, Apple Arcade, not for me. Too mobile, too arcadey, but for people who like mobile games, then I think it's excellent, you know? There seems to be some great options and there's some great support as well. And the cross-play functionality between iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, and macOS is really neat. So, you know, to Apple, I say keep it up. However, I'm really hoping you start pushing into the PC gaming market more. You know, start incentivizing more developers and studios to bring their games to Mac. That's what I really want to see. It doesn't need to be hundreds of titles, but some of the bigger games I think would be really awesome to see on Mac OS. Hogwarts Legacy, for example, would have been a great one to get on Mac in the App Store. That would have been a huge title, and I think it would have felt right at home on Mac OS, being a bit more of a casual title. Disney Dreamlight Valley is another one, but we actually got that one. Fingers crossed that more slowly make their way over. But anyways, that's it for this one. See you next time.